Yeah, so you've been hearing about his life at work, and I'm going to share some of the aspects of his home life. I'll start right at the very beginning. He was born as a single child up in Seattle to great academic parents. His father was a professional musician, and his mother was a housewife. She did have a job once making See's candy. So somehow he got himself involved in academia. Um, and throughout elementary school, he was kind of a model student, but that didn't prevent him from hanging out with some of the less reputable folks as playmates. And I remember a story he said once where his school teacher was walking up his street and saw him playing with one of his friends, and her jaw just dropped to the ground because she couldn't believe that her model student was playing with this riffraff type. He lived through the Great Depression. He was about 10 years old when that hit, and for a couple of summers, he and his mother actually made a living by picking berries in the fields. Didn't have an easy life of that. But as a result of the Great Depression, it left a lifelong attitude of don't throw anything away. Just save it until it's worn out, and save it beyond when it's worn out, because you just can't throw it away. And it's kind of rubbed off on some of us too. Later on through school, he joined ROTC near the end of high school, and that helped to fund him through the University of Washington. And then that was in the preview to World War II, and everyone was called into active service in World War II. While he was in the Army, that's where he met my mother. And it was on a blind date when they met, and they've been married some 74 years now. She stated that he was just breathtakingly handsome in his uniform, and he was. It was pretty impressive to see the pictures. His initial assignment when he was in the Army was to be a meteorologist in Seattle. And in Seattle, that was considered a target for bombers from Japan, because they had the Boeing plant up there making all of our airplanes. And so they would fly barrage balloons, and his job as meteorologist was to try to predict when the wind would come up, because if the wind came up and blew loose all these barrage balloons, it would create havoc through the city by shorting out all the power lines and dragging through things. He eventually went overseas near the end of the war, around the time of the Battle of the Bulge, and served as a lieutenant in a prison camp that was caretaking German soldiers that they had captured. The military, when he returned, military paid for a school at Northwestern in Chicago, and that's where he and Berg married. They'd been dating through this time. There he got his MD and completed his residency, but went directly into research. He never practiced medicine. Barry mentioned granite, working with granite. That was one of his early jobs, and he went over to Sweden and lived there with Berg for a couple of years, and that's actually where they adopted Stig. So went over without kids and came back with a kid. As you know, he was very dedicated to his work. His experiments in his lab were kind of infamous. They were marathon sessions. They went on for 24 hours, well, actually more like 72 hours straight. There'd be cots and sleeping bags in the lab, and people would take shifts, and they just went on and on. It was pretty famous for that. He dragged me once to the room storing all the willed bodies to help extract spinal cord for the medical school. he was always interested in just random facts and would have us scrambling for references if we were in the home and he'd ask some question that no one would have any way of knowing the answer to. So we'd be jumping to the dictionary or jumping to the Encyclopedia Britannica, trying to figure out what was going on. That was his hallmark. On one particularly memorable occasion, he brought a brain home from UCLA and proceeded to dissect it on our dining table in the kitchen. And in between sessions of dissection, it was stored in the fridge next to our milk and eggs. You know, on a similar vein, he saw a dead vulture, a vulture that had been killed in Texas, and he thought, oh, that'd be a cool thing to have at home. So he brought it home on the airplane, and the airplane didn't smell too good at the end of the trip. As kids, he would always dream up challenges for us to do to try to get us to compete with one another. Like I remember one time he challenged Stig and me to try to figure out how to open tomato juice cans without any tools. And so we somehow figured out how to do that. It made a mess, but more on athletics. He wasn't a big skier, though he had cross-country skis and he occasionally did that. But we went on a family trip up to Mammoth, and all the skiers are barreling down the cornice at Mammoth, and my father was hiking up in snowshoes. And we overheard people on the chairlifts talking about, boy, did you see that guy going up the cornice on snowshoes? So that was Earl. Should mention at home his study is a virtual museum. He's got snake skins, he's got some 24 skulls, including several human skulls. He has a gorilla skull from Chicago, from the Chicago Zoo, a whale tusk, souvenirs from Amazon natives, and as well as his extensive collection of books on anatomy, neurophysiology, and related topics. Some more quirks of his: he had some odd eating habits, including a great love of ketchup, pickle relish, and peanuts. Ketchup he would put on anything, including on the gourmet salmon that his mother-in-law would spend half the day baking. Pickle relish he would also put on almost anything. One day we got him to make eggs and ham for breakfast, and he put pickle relish on it. It was literally green eggs and ham. And his peanuts, they'd be roasting continuously on a Bunsen burner in his lab at UCLA. And I think they enlisted Al Meyer into taking that over, and that was part of his activities. And as we've noted, exercise was certainly always a priority of Earl's. He'd run us as a family around the track as early as I remember. His idea of a vacation day off was drag the family down to the UCLA pool, and we could do laps in the pool. He put, at any excuse, he would lift weights or do isometric exercises on the steering wheel of the car or whatever. In his living room, he has a barbell set, and it's been there forever, plus a sit-up bench. There's a chinning bar that's permanently mounted in the doorway in our kitchen. You walk in the house and you're expected to do pull-ups. He had a long-standing prize offered to anyone who could walk into that kitchen and do a one-arm pull-up on that chinning bar. It was a $100 prize like 40 years ago, and so that was real money, and no one has won the prize. And lifting weights, here at the gym and also at the gym up in the valley, he'd go there and lift the entire rack of the weights on that leg machine. And it would bring around a crowd of gawkers, you know, these big football players who were just like amazed that he could be lifting that much. He's running. He's been running a lot, always. He's run some 13 marathons. We've lost track, and it's just a countless number of 10K races that he's been in. Outdoors, he's always had a great love of the outdoors. You know, taking Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Sierra Club, group from work on all sorts of long hiking trips and trips up to the beach and that kind of thing. As part of that, he loved climbing mountains, and there's quite a collection of mountains that he's climbed, like Whitney, Rainier, Longs Peak, and Mount Fuji, San Jacinto, San Gorgonio, Mount Baldy, and so on. One interesting, there we are. It's been mentioned that he often ran to UCLA, and often he dragged the whole family on his hikes to UCLA. And just an interesting tidbit, on one of those hikes, we hiked on the 405 freeway as it was being constructed. So, let's see. We did a number of memorable trips with the Boy Scouts. Stig and I and Earl were active in the Boy Scouts together. We hiked the entire John Muir Trail. We did a number of hikes from Gaviota to Halama up there by Santa Barbara, where part of it was hiking on the beach. Part of it was wading through the water to get around these points that the water was lapping up the cliffs of. And part of it, there wasn't anywhere to walk but on train trestles, and you kind of cross your fingers that a train doesn't come along. One point he went up Mount Hood with Bird in her earlier days, and they helped to rescue a pilot who had landed his airplane up there and couldn't get the engine started. Go figure. One of his travels that was always on his bucket list, he had a very extensive collection. He loved books about Antarctica and Arctic exploration, and one of the things on his bucket list was to go to Antarctica, and he did that after retirement. And on the way, he met Edmund Hillary, and they have pictures of them together, and that was one of his idols through his life. So, in summary, we'll miss him. He's left his mark on me. Here are some of the specific ways. Academia, he was an academic. I've been involved in rocket science for my whole life. I haven't had any other job. He was very thrifty. As I mentioned, he would never throw anything away. It's kind of worn off on me. My last car, which I just recently replaced, had only 375,000 miles on it, so that tells you something. It's already been made clear he was into exercise, and I'm kind of the same way. I'll ride my bike up to Wrightwood for the weekend. He loves the outdoors and traveling, and so have I. And I've done just as odd things as he has. So at any rate, that's a glimpse into his personal life and what he was like outside of the office here. Thank you.